regular subject for those of you who might be new. We're trying to go through different svarim of Nach, especially the svarim that are usually not covered. So what we've been doing lately is we've been going through Sefer Daniel, then Ezra, and then we'll go through Nehemiah. So Sefer Daniel, we already covered. Those of you who missed it, I'm very, very sorry, but we did cover that. We are in the middle of Ezra, actually towards the end of Ezra. And again, the book of Ezra is the book that is describing the return of the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael after the Babylonian destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, right? We know, we just had Tisha B'Av a short while ago. We know that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash, which had stood for 410 years, and the Jewish people were exiled primarily to Babylonia, which is modern-day Iraq, and that was the Golus of Bavel. And the Babylonian Empire was eventually conquered by Persia, which is modern-day Iran. So essentially, Bavel was succeeded by Persia. And the king of Persia was Koresh, Cyrus, and Cyrus gave permission for the Jewish people to return to Eretz Yisrael. Now, this was not 70 years, this was 52 years after the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash. Koresh gave reshus for the Jewish people to return to Eretz Yisrael. Very dishearteningly, only a small percentage of the Jewish people took up that offer. Only 10% of the population returned. The number is given around 42,000 people returned, and people estimate around 4 million was a total population, simply because, similar to what is even true today, many Jews were more comfortable in the diaspora than they would be coming to a land. Of course, there they had more of an excuse than today. The land was desolate, empty, dangerous, poverty-stricken, much less so, Baruch Hashem, today, and most of the Jews did not return. But be it as it may, the first wave of exiles that returned after 52 years were under the leadership of a man called Zerubbabel. And you may remember the name, if you're not familiar with the Nach itself, with Ma'os Sur in the song that we sing when we light the Hanukkah candles. So we say, Kates Bavel, Zerubbabel. The end of the Babylonian exile was the return under Zerubbabel. Now, Zerubbabel is a very, very shadowy character. His name is mentioned a number of times, particularly in the book of Ezra, and in Zechariah. Remember, the last prophets at the time of the return to Eretz Yisrael were Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So in Zechariah in particular, Zerubbabel is mentioned, and he is described as virtually a messianic figure, meaning it seems to be that even the Nevi'im themselves thought that Zerubbabel was potentially Mashiach. He is described in those terms, in very, very glorious terms. And in fact, there are midrashim in Chazal that indicate, and this is something to think about, that if more of the Jewish people would have returned to Eretz Yisrael when there was a call to come and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and they were given such a call, then perhaps that would have been the Geula. That would have overthrown the Persian domination. That would have brought Mashiach. Zerubbabel could have been Mashiach. That's the thing you have to understand, that Mashiach is not just a single person. In every generation, I mean, think about this. Without getting into controversies, whatever, if we believe, if one of the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amuna is that Mashiach can come every day, if we would be Zocha, and Mashiach is a human being, that has to mean that at any given moment in time, there is a person that will be the designated Mashiach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if at any moment we would be Zocha. Now, does that person know, does Mashiach know that he is Mashiach? Not necessarily. He might live and die without ever realizing that he would have been the Mashiach had the generation been worthy. I don't want to get into Chabad, but I think to some degree, people say, why didn't the Rebbe either confirm or deny? Why didn't he say he was? Why didn't he say he wasn't? And I don't have it. I mean, I can't say I know anything, but I would just suggest that he genuinely did not know. He was waiting to hear from a higher authority, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, most of us are fairly confident. If somebody were to stop me, or maybe I shouldn't talk about anybody here, or stop you and say, "Are you Mashiach?" Most of us would be fairly comfortable saying no, although you never know. But let's assume you're a person who very well might be. You kind of fit the rules, but you haven't yet heard that you are or that you're not. So what are you supposed to say? I mean, just be quite honest. What are you supposed to say? You can't say no because maybe the answer is yes. You can't say yes because maybe the answer is no. So again, Lanias Daiti, this is just my own uneducated speculation. This may have been the situation. I'm not referring to the movement of Lubavitch. What they do is what they do. But in terms of the Rebbe himself, that the Rebbe was waiting for a sign, Min HaShamayim. So going back to Zerubbabel, therefore, if the Navi Zechariah describes Zerubbabel as a Mashiach, that is not at all false. The fact that he didn't wind up becoming Mashiach is not a negation of his Mashiachos, simply because the generation was not worthy, and Chazal identified that primarily because they did not respond to the call to return to Eretz Yisrael. That itself is a bit of a profound musar, because some people say, well, we'll come back to the land when Mashiach comes. Part of the teaching of Zerubbabel, almost the tragedy of Zerubbabel, is it's the other way around. When you show your desire to return to Eretz Yisrael, that is what brings the Geula. Now again, we have to separate issues. I'm not discussing right now, at least, the state of Israel. That is a separate issue. Is it good to have a Jewish state? Remember, in the time of Ezra, they didn't really have a Jewish state. It was under the Persian Empire. Is a Jewish state good? Is a Jewish state bad? Is it part of the Geula, not part of the Geula? That is an important issue that I am not talking about that today. I am simply talking about a simpler issue, and that is returning to the land to live in Eretz Yisrael. And we very, very clearly see that had more of the Jewish people returned to Eretz Yisrael in the days of Zerubbabel, the Bayis Sheni would have been. See, people make a mistake. People think, oh, it's only the third temple that'll be indestructible. That's not true. It doesn't say there have to be 3 temples. It is true that the Messianic temple will never be destroyed, but that could have been the second temple, meaning the second temple could have been the Messianic temple, and you wouldn't need a third temple, right? So why did the second temple turn out to be a temporary Beis HaMikdash that was eventually destroyed by the Romans after 420 years? And why, for the entire Hemshech of the Bayis Sheni, were we under foreign domination, first Persia and then Greece, with a brief interlude of 100 or so years of the Hashmonaim, but then Rome, and it certainly was not messianic, and the second temple was destroyed, and the Rambam even says they knew it was going to be destroyed, and they observed the fast of Tisha B'Av when there was a second Beis HaMikdash, because they knew this was going to be destroyed. So Chazal say, I'm not saying it's the only reason. I mean, Chazal do say the famous statement that the second temple was destroyed because of sinas chinam, hatred. But part of why the whole thing didn't become a messianic time was started off with the idea that only a small percentage of Jews responded to Koresh's invitation. And as a result, the Klal Yisrael did not show they were mitzapeh legeula, so therefore the Geula did not come. Yeah. Again? I'm sorry, I don't hear you. Well, because if you look, so again, be careful about third temple, because it doesn't have to be the third temple, but there will be a temple that will not be destroyed. This is in Sefer Yechezkel. Sefer Yechezkel. Yechezkel was one of the Nevi'im at the time of the Churban Bayis Rishon. Just to position him, he was mamash, a contemporary of Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu was in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the Churban. Yechezkel was already in Bavel 11 years earlier, but they are the 2 prophets who experienced the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And the last 10 chapters of Sefer Yechezkel talk about the final temple that shall never be destroyed. Now again, though, he doesn't say the third temple. The third temple is a retrospective adjustment once the second temple gets destroyed, so we have to assume. In fact, some have said, hey, Okay, this gets into a whole shaila, and that is everything's related. I don't want to get too confusing, and I don't want to get too confused. Uh, should we? All right. Should we build a Beis Hamikdash right now? So some have suggested that since building a Beis Hamikdash is one of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, which it is, v'yasu li mikdash v'shachanti b'socham, we are mechuyev to build a Beis Hamikdash now. Now, let's imagine for a moment you follow that halachic position, how you do it, or whatever. So there's no guarantee that won't be destroyed, which means the statement, the third temple will not be destroyed, is not really automatically accurate. The accurate statement is the Messianic temple shall not be destroyed. Now, most poskim follow the view of the Rambam that says we're not supposed to build a Beis Hamikdash till Mashiach comes. So if you go with the Rambam, it is true that the third temple will not be destroyed, but not because it's the third temple, but because it's the Messianic temple. So even a well-known statement that everybody says, the third Beis Hamikdash will never be destroyed, it all depends on what your halachic position is regarding the building of a Beis Hamikdash before Mashiach. Because if you take the position that the building of the Beis Hamikdash can occur before Mashiach, then Einachinami, I mean, we hope it won't be destroyed. It doesn't have to be destroyed, but we don't have this haftacha. But if you follow the Shitas HaRambam, that we are disabled from building a Beis Hamikdash till Mashiach, so at that point we have the Navi of Yechezkel, that the Messianic temple shall not be destroyed. Okay, I hope that clarifies it a little bit. Now, I will say that I believe there's a very strong raya from Midrashim to the Rambam's view, and that is Chazal do refer to the idea that the third Mikdash will not be destroyed, meaning they do correlate it to the third Beis Hamikdash. And the Ramban in Chumash says there's a strong remiss to this, to the story of Yitzchak and the wells. Do you remember in Parshas Toldos, Yitzchak and his avadim are digging wells in the desert around Beersheba, and the Pelishtim come and harass them by filling up their wells. So if you're fighting with them, arguing with them, quarreling with them, claiming the wells for themselves. So if you recall, the first well was called Asek, which is quarrelsome, fighting. The second well was called Sitna, which is hatred. And the third well, finally there was no fighting, they called it Rechovot, expansiveness. Right? The city of Rechovos is based on that. So the Ramban says that is a remez. A well is a remez to the Mikdash, and the notion that the two wells, in fact, he says, quarrelsome is Avodah Zarah, where you quarrel with God. Sitna is Sinas Chinam, which is the second Churban. Rechovot is a remez that the third temple will not be destroyed. So all I'm saying is that Chazal do say that the third temple will last forever, but that would only fit like the Rambam Shita, that it requires Yemos Mashiach. In other words, in Tanakh itself, there is no direct reference to the number 3 as being significant. There is only the idea that the Messianic temple will not be destroyed. Now, again, to go back over, I'm just summarizing Ezra up to the point that we're going to be continuing. So the small group of Jews that returned under Zerubbabel, who could have been indeed Mashiach, they actually began building the Beis Hamikdash. They began building the Beis Hamikdash during the reign of Koresh, which was 52 years after the Churban. But what happened was a group of people that are called the Tzarei Yehuda uBinyamin, the adversaries, the enemies of Yehuda and Binyamin, which were the main two tribes that returned, they wrote an accusation to Koresh, called a sitna. They wrote a sitna to Koresh, claiming that the Jews were constructing a temple to serve as a fortress to throw off Persian domination and use it as a basis for rebellion. Chazal have a Messiah, although it's not explicit in the Navi here, that the Tzarei Yehuda and Binyamin were none other than the 10 sons of Haman, who are already trying, kind of to make things bad for the Jewish people. And as a result, Koresh himself issued an interdiction prohibiting further construction of the Beis HaMikdash. And that lasted for the reign of Koresh, who was succeeded by the Achashverosh of the Purim story. Okay, in fact, in other words, the interdiction continued during the reign of Achashverosh. Right, so the Purim story happened during this time, during the 18-year period between the return of some of the Jews. Obviously, Mordechai, and when it was in Persia, right? So he was an example of someone who was not in Eretz Yisrael at the time. And indeed, Chazal say, when Achashverosh asks Esther, he doesn't know that Esther's Jewish. So remember, at the party, he says to Esther, "What can I give you, Esther? Ask for anything you want. I will give you ad chatzia malchus. I will give you up to half of my kingdom." So Chazal say that Achashverosh is alluding to something here. He says, we have a tradition that Yerushalayim is the middle of the world, whatever that means. It's the center of the world. It's the fulcrum of the world. And the Beis HaMikdash is the fulcrum of Yerushalayim. So he doesn't want to give Esther carte blanche to ask for whatever she wants, because maybe she's Jewish and she'll ask to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. So he says, I'll give you up to the midpoint, but not the midpoint. So don't ask for the Beis HaMikdash. So it continued. So for 18 years, that encompassed the remainder of the reign of Koresh and the remainder of the reign of Achashverosh. The Beis HaMikdash was not rebuilt. There was no Beis HaMikdash. But finally, the one who authorized the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash was the son of Achashverosh, the king after the Purim story, whose name was Daryavesh Hasheni. He's Darius II. And Chazal have a Masorah, although it's not Beferish here, that Daryavesh Hasheni was, we know he was the son of Achashverosh, that is recorded, but his mother was none other than Esther Hamalka. According to Chazal, as tragic as it may sound on one level, Achashverosh had a son from Esther, and that son was Daryavesh Hasheni. Now, it's very, very interesting. This is a hidden aspect of Esther Hamalka's heroism that we don't realize. If you compute the ages, Daryavesh Hasheni was a relatively young boy when he became king. Daryavesh Hasheni was probably 7 or 8 when he became king. And in the second year of his reign, although most of the Jews still didn't return, he lifted the interdiction of Koresh, and he allowed the reconstruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So an 8 or 9-year-old boy who happened to be Jewish, so the Persian king who allowed the rebuilding of the second Beis HaMikdash was in fact Jewish because his mother was Jewish. Now, here you have to understand that obviously Ima was a big influence, meaning to say he was king, but he was just a kid. So in many ways, we don't know, all of this is so murky, but in many, many ways, one can say that the real instigator, who was Gorei, the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, was none other than Esther Hamalka, because of the good influence that she had on her son, Daryavesh Hasheni. And again, al pi hashgacha, even though on one level, again, it's very ambivalent. Because, keep in mind, and I remember, give you a little reminiscence. I remember when I was in kindergarten, and it was, co-ed Jewish day school. It was an Orthodox day school, although most of the kids were not Shomer Shabbos. But when we kind of dramatized Megillas Esther in kindergarten, so we dramatized, forgive me, as kind of this beauty contest in which Queen Esther was chosen because she was the most beautiful, and it was a competition in which she was trying to win. Now, obviously, nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah, Esther indeed was very beautiful spiritually and physically. But to say that Esther was hoping to be chosen is horrendously false. This was a tragedy of immense proportions in terms of Esther's personal life. She was the wife of the Gadol Hador, Mordechai. She was a tzadekes. In fact, the fact that she was chosen didn't even make sense because the conditions for being chosen was to be a basula, to be a virgin. Esther was not a basula. She was married to Mordechai for a number of years, and yet somehow her status was such that all the rules were overridden, and she was taken. So in many, many ways, her life was a very, very tragic life. It was a tragic life where spiritually she gave up a tremendous amount, but ultimately she turned out to be the mechanism for the Hatzalah of Am Yisrael, and as I added now, even the mechanism for the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. So, when someone like Esther Hamalka, who's such a tzadekes, has a child from Achashverosh, how do you, these things happen even today. How do you deal with that? On one hand, a child is a bracha, and the child is Jewish, and the child could grow up to be the tzaddik who allows the building of the Beis Hamikdash. On the other hand, look at the circumstances from which it came. And yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has cheshbonos that are very, very deep and very, very complicated, and we don't really understand it. But somehow, out of the darkness of her being forcibly seized and essentially forcibly raped over many, many years with Achashverosh, and even having a child as a perpetual reminder and connection to that sin, this was the mechanism by which the second Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt out of the darkest, most negative experiences, right? So this is part of Esther Hamalka's life that we don't automatically think about, but how instrumental she was in getting the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt. And as a result, according to Zechariah gives you the chronology. Daryavish Hasheni allowed the rebuilding of the second temple in the second year of his reign, and it was completed in the 6th year of his reign. So it took 4 years to be constructed. As we discussed, without going over all the halachas, they could bring korbanos even before they completed construction. The korbanos could be brought right away. You didn't need the whole Beis Hamikdash to be constructed, but it took 4 years. And in the 6th year of Daryavish Hasheni's reign, that is when they dedicated the Bayis Sheni. Now, I just want to point out, though, it is important to know in terms of numbers. Chazal have a tradition that the first Mikdash lasted 410, and the second Mikdash lasted 420. But when you're counting the 410 and the 420, you are not counting from the completion of the binyan. You are counting from the beginning of construction. This is very important. So when we say the second temple lasted 420 years, we are counting from the second year. You may not know why that's important, but rest assured that if you count from the 6th year, the numbers wouldn't work out. So you're counting from the second year. And similarly with Shlomo HaMelech, where the Mikdash also took a number of years, the 410 is counting from the construction. It is not counting from the completion. Okay, now, in the 7th year of Daryavish Hasheni, which is only 1 year after the dedication of the second Beis Hamikdash, that is when Ezra shows up. So Ezra, who is such a phenomenally great tzaddik, and the whole book is named after Ezra, Ezra is quite literally, again, I'm summarizing, we discussed some of this, a Johnny-come-lately. Ezra does not even show up till after the Beis Hamikdash is completed and is dedicated, and then he shows up. So people often make a mistake because people often confuse Zerubbabel with Ezra. So again, a common statement people make is, Ezra came up with a number of Jews and they rebuilt a second temple. That is not an accurate statement. Ezra did not show up at all until 1 year after the second Mikdash was built. It was Zerubbabel, under the guidance of Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, or maybe Chagai, Zechariah at least, that rebuilt the Beis HaMikdash after the 18-year hiatus due to the Tzarei Yehuda Binyamin. Okay, so again, we'll continue the review a little bit, and then we'll go on to something new tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.